My name is Steve Muse and I work for Somerset Wildlife Trust. Alongside Avon Wildlife Trust, Natural England and the RSPB, we are part of a Somerset peatland partnership funded by the Nature for Climate Peatland Grant Scheme. Here on the Somerset levels, there is an estimated 11 million tonnes of carbon stored in our lowland peat. But that carbon and the peatlands themselves are under threat. But I'm way ahead of myself here. First, a bit of background. After the last ice age, 10,000 years ago, there was no peat in Somerset. The melting glaciers left behind wide, clay-lined valleys. Then the sea levels began to recede and stabilised around 6,500 years ago. At this point, reeds began colonising the bottom of the valleys, in time forming massive reed swamps. As the reeds died and fell into the water, they did not fully decay in the anaerobic acidic conditions. So over time, layers upon layers of dead organic matter and the carbon within it was preserved as peat. Then the reed swamps gave way to freshwater communities, with sedges and mosses dominating, and in some drier areas, trees encroached too. These habitats also contributed dead organic matter to the profile of the peat. In some parts of the Somerset levels, the peatlands reached a height at which they were mostly rain-fed, and with low and nutrient inputs, bog species like sphagnum moss, sundew and cotton grass became dominant. Anaerobic acidic conditions are key to peat formation. However, as of today, we don't really have active peat-forming habitats in lowland Somerset. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the Romans began to reclaim the land of the Somerset levels and moors. Later on, the bishops and abbots, followed by drainage boards and river authorities, have all had their part to play, digging ditches, canalising rivers and draining even the most stubborn of bogs in order to gain land to live, work and grow food on. But draining the land in this way and creating this artificial landscape has caused peat wastage and subsidence, which in some areas has caused the ground level to sink by as much as 1 metre in the last 100 years. Today, this engineered landscape is managed by the Internal Drainage Board and the Environment Agency in an effort to minimise flood risk in wetter months and ensure water supply for agriculture in summer. This drone footage shows the agricultural nature of the area with a patchwork of fields. But if you look closely, you will see that some of these fields are edged with ditches or wet hedgerows, and the larger watercourse, the River Brew, is particularly straight. That is because the monks dug a completely new river channel. The original route was miles away, running due north from Glastonbury. A crucial point to note is that by draining peatland, the anaerobic conditions that stored the carbon safely is disrupted. As the water table drops, oxygen becomes present in the soil, aerobic conditions allow microbial respiration and the decomposition of the peat to begin. Through these processes, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases such as methane are released to the atmosphere. We estimate some 300,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent are released each year in this way in Somerset. But this drainage of the landscape isn't the only threat to the peat. Alongside Cumbria, Somerset is the last of just 2 counties in England where industrial peat mining is still taking place today. In the past, peat was dug by hand and used locally to heat people's homes. More recently, it has been dug mechanically. The process starts by stripping the vegetation from the surface of the peat. This damage can still be seen today in the stripes that are visible in this footage of West Hay Moor, in areas that were prepared but never fully mined. In the 50s and 60s, there were several changes to the peat mining industry. High-flow pumps were available to deep-drain peat workings, allowing the peat to be mined right down to the underlying clay. The use of mechanical diggers or excavators became commonplace, so far greater quantities of peat could be removed than ever before. Once removed from the ground, the peat is stockpiled to dry before it is blended into compost. Given peat's properties to help soil drain freely and its low weed burden, the commercialisation of peat compost was highly lucrative. But what happens to large open peat mines? Well, typically they have been lined with clay and allowed to fill with water. Some are managed as fishing lakes for recreation, others are managed to improve their conservation value. Over the past 50 years, Somerset Wildlife Trust, Natural England and the RSPB have bought several old peat workings and managed them as a mosaic of reed beds and open water, fantastic habitats for nesting and overwintering wildfowl and a whole host of other wildlife. But this has happened at the cost of peat, worsening climate change and reduced ecosystem services. The peat mining is licensed and some local people's livelihoods depend upon it. However, the peat that is removed was formed over thousands of years and is by no means renewable. Once dried out and removed from the ground, the carbon that was locked up is released and carries on being released when it goes into plant pots or is spread onto gardens. The peat mining licenses were issued by the County Council decades ago, before climate change was a consideration, and without the knowledge that we would be facing a climate emergency today. In 2011, The government set voluntary targets to end sales of peat-based compost for domestic use by 2020. However, peat-based comp products were still available to buy, so it is not perhaps a surprise that the campaign was unsuccessful. In August 2022, the government announced that the sale of bagged horticultural peat for public would end in 2024. We are working with DEFRA to ensure this ban is comprehensive and happens as soon as possible. So what can we do to protect our peat box? We can buy peat-free compost, we can buy plants grown in peat-free media, we can make sure we compost at home, we can spread the word and talk about these amazing biodiverse ecosystems, their ability to combat climate change and the threats they face. So that's it for me. Goodbye from the Somerset Levels and Moors.